Hi and welcome to this week of homeschooling here during our little Corona break. Again, I'll much rather be up in biology with you, but this is what we got. This week I will be looking at section 21.4 in the syllabus, the last part, which is conservation. And in the book here, it is section 22.4 in the textbook. And I will now try to go over what I think are the most important points. So please stay with me. So today I'm going to talk about conservation, and conservation is itself in biology one of the major subjects and one that we could talk about for the entire year, but now it's only part of the syllabus. The aim of conservation in biology is to try to maintain biodiversity. Biodiversity is the diversity of species living in an area, and to be able to do that, well, the first thing we need to know is knowledge of where we do have a high biodiversity. Here below I have two pictures from a Danish forest. On our left we see an undisturbed forest, and on the right we see what we call a production forest, a forest where we grow trees for cutting them down. And while they both, to the untrained eye, look like forest, the one on the left with dead trees with different species of trees will have a much higher biodiversity than the one on the right. The one on the right is pretty much a monoculture, like a wheat field. So being able to identify the areas with high biodiversity and try to maintain those with conservation is one of the main subject of today's talk. So our last example was of Danish forest, but on a global scale there are many different environments, global hotspots as we call them, which we would like to protect because of their high biodiversity and because they're vulnerable. The first one is our wetlands, our swamps or marshes. They are home to many birds and reptiles and plant species, and they're often being threatened by people draining them and using that for construction or farming. The second one is our mangrove forest. The mangrove forest are trees that can grow in salt water, and by doing so they create a habitat where many other species can live and prosper. So the trees in themselves give shelter to many species of fish, reptiles and so on. The third one, which we all know from Finding Nemo, is the coral reefs. Our coral reefs has the highest biodiversity in the ocean. They only cover a small portion of the ocean, but they have a very rich biodiversity due to our coral and the algae living there. And the last one is of course the tropical rainforest, which has a very high biodiversity and are home to species we only find there, and many of the species of insects and mammals, birds can only be found here in the tropical rainforest. So conserving wetlands, mangrove, coral reefs and rainforest is very important if we want to keep the global biodiversity high. So what are the trade-offs? Why aren't we protecting biodiversity globally all the time? Well, one is there's a major trade-off between agriculture and nature. We cut down most of our forests for agriculture, and that is what is happening in many developing countries as well. There's a lot of fast money to be made from farming, and money being made from tourism in the forest might come slower. So a lot of it is about money. Other things are about a conflict in interest. For example, an interest in a high yield fishing might be very different than the interest in ecotourism. For example, it's very clear to see on Iceland, where they still allow whale hunting, that on one part of the dock you have the whale hunting ships, and on the other part you have the whale watching ships. And those two groups have a very different interest in how we use nature. The last thing is there's a difference between how we might see things globally and how local NGOs might want to work with the problems. Now, down here below I have included two pictures I took myself, one of a butterfly and one of an orchid. Both of these species are wonderful, they're beautiful, but let's be honest, the economic interest in either of these species is very low. So if we want to protect them, perhaps we have to find other reasons than money. So when we talk about conserving the environment and conserving species, we often talk about sustainable resources. And what is the difference between a sustainable resource and a non-sustainable? Well, for example, using wood for building buildings is sustainable because new trees grow up every year. And if you don't cut down any more than grow up, this is a sustainable resource. On the other hand, fossil fuels we dig up from the ground is non-sustainable as we use them up way faster than they are being produced again. Fishing and hunting can be sustainable if it's done in a reasonable manner. For example, if we only fish the amount of fish that the population can supply each year, we will still have fish next year and then it'll be sustainable. But if we do overfishing or overhunting, we can reduce or even kill off the population and then it's non-sustainable. Recycling helps making resources way more sustainable, and we'll talk about this on the next slide. So recycling, I think you've all seen the different bins, and recycling helps making many resources more sustainable. For example, here in Denmark, we recycle glass bottles, which means a bottle can be used again and again, which means we have a lower use of resources for bottles. Plastic is a big thing because plastic ending up in the ocean is a huge problem pollution-wise, and plastic is a resource, so plastic can be recycled, made into new plastic bottles or clothing and so on. So by recycling plastic, we actually help protect the environment. Paper can be recycled, so we don't have to cut down more forest to produce more paper, and metals can be recycled. So for a lot of things, it is smart to think about recycling because we are now so many humans on Earth and we're using so many resources that being able to use a resource more than once isn't just smart for the economy, it's also really smart for the planet. One place where we humans tend to pollute a lot is actually when taking a dump. Back when we were all hunter-gatherers, it didn't matter. It was the same as every other animal. You took a dump sometimes and it ended up in nature. But when you're living 1 to 3 million people in a big city, that's a lot of dump to get rid of. And some places still have, raw sewage running straight into the nature. That's a huge problem. One is that it contains, apart from water, of course, urine, feces, toilet paper, and chemicals from household cleaning, factories, and so on. One thing is that bacteria in this can, of course, make people sick. If you live downriver and you go wash your clothes or go fishing and it's full of bacteria, that can make you sick. It can also cause eutrophication, as we talked about earlier, where the amount of nutrients lead to algae bloom, and chemicals can end up damaging or killing wildlife. So, we want the sewage from our cities to be treated properly before it's released back into nature. So, what is being done many places is what we call sewage treatment. What happens here is the raw sewage comes running into a group of filters where you remove bigger parts like paper, bicycles, whatever, and then you have, the sewage run into the grit chamber. Here, the more heavy parts sink to the bottom, and that is saved away, and the water then runs into the, with all the stuff in, runs into the primary clarifier. With the heavier parts here will sink right into the sludge, while the water will run into tanks where we'll mix the tank with air. Here, bacteria will help to break down the organic compounds, and these will then fall to the bottom, and in the second clarifier they'll sink to the bottom, and again we will have a separation between the sludge and the clean water. We might then disinfect the water even further, either chemically or by UV radiation, or we will let this water run then into the stream. By doing this, we will have removed most of the organic matter, we will remove most bacteria, and we remove most large objects from the water. And the sludge which we're left with can then be used either as fuel for fire, or if it contains a lot of nitrogen, we can use it as fertilizers on the field. So one of the reasons why we humans are such a dominant species on our planet is because we have developed our society a lot, and we have done that by using our natural resources. But now, as we're pushing around 7 billion people on Earth, there's a lot of thought into how we can have a more sustainable development. Because if we cut down all the forest and catch all the fish, while it might give a short-term economic growth, it won't leave much for future generations. So a lot of debate when we talk about conservation and the environment is how to have a development without damaging nature too much. So one thing we do know work is protected areas. By having national parks either on land or in the ocean, we can protect a lot of the areas with high biodiversity. So if we protect the areas with high biodiversity and then keep farming and other stuff in the areas with low biodiversity, we keep the biodiversity and still have a good economic growth. Also, by protecting areas with high biodiversity in the ocean, we tend to see a higher outcome of fishing in the adjacent areas, as way more young fish survive in the protected areas, and when they grow big they swim out into the other areas. And we also see a huge gain from a tourism point of view, as many people would love to go to a good national park and observe the wildlife. Here in Denmark we have been quite bad at doing national parks, because our national parks aren't really national parks, because we still have farming, hunting and everything inside them. But in many other countries, the idea of national parks work really, really well. So when we talk about protecting the environment and protecting biodiversity, we often think about endangered species such as tigers or orangutans. And there are four major things that tend to put species into the endangered categories. And the first and most important is destruction of the habitat. You can't have a species if you don't have the habitat where it belongs. Nothing else matters if the environment the species is adapted to disappears. If the coral reef disappears, so does the clownfish. The second part is hunting. Some animals, especially bigger animals, are hunted for trophies because people believe they have medical values and so on. So we do see that species as rhinos, tigers, stuff like that get hunted and sometimes get hunted into extinction. We humans have hunted several species into extinction, the dodo being one of them, and we'll probably do that to even more. A third thing is pollution. Some species are very sensible to pollution, and if you pollute the environment they live in, that's going to damage them a lot. And the last is introduced species. For example, on many islands where there never been any predators, if you introduce cats, for example, that can mean a lot to the native birds living there because they have not evolved to deal with a threat like a cat. So these are the four things that can really push a species towards extinction, and if all of it happens at the same time, it can be quite hard to save that species. But again, the most important thing is protecting the habitat. So as biologists, we really want to protect endangered species. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing is, of course, to conserve the habitat first. So in this case here, we're looking at a flightless pigeon from New Zealand. We have to protect the forest where it lives first. Then we have to do monitoring. We have to know how many are left or how few are left, where are they, so we can protect them. In really bad cases, we can use selective breeding, where you have either animals from captivity you reintroduce to get enough animals to get the population going again. We also need protection from hunting. We got to make sure that illegal hunting and poaching is not pushing the species toward extinction. And we probably, in case here of a flightless pigeon, we have to eliminate the introduced species, in this case here cats and rats, because they are a heavy predator on the young birds. And last but not least, we have to use the local knowledge of people who live there, who know the forest, who know the species, use their knowledge and their engagement to help protect the species. If all these things work, we can pull species back from the brink of extinction. But again, it really only helps pulling them back from extinction if we have a habitat where they can live. This brings us back to national parks and protected areas. So, why protect endangered species? It's not like in your daily life you're going to see that many tigers or that many condors or that many bald-headed eagles. Does it matter? Well, yeah, it does matter, but it matters for different reasons. One thing is that if we protect the species, we also tend to protect the ecosystem. Remember, we have to protect the environment where they live. So if we have a healthy forest where the tiger can live, we also protect that environment. Also, losing what we call keystone species can have a huge impact. For example, if we hunt all the sharks in the ocean, those top predators will be missing, and that will have an effect down the food chain. There are also financial and scientific reasons. Financial reason being that there's a lot of money being made from ecotourism, and scientific reasons being that we have found many interesting chemicals in plants, algae, so on, that can be used for medicine. But I think the most important thing is something completely different. I think we should protect these rare species because they're here, because they exist, because they're really awesome. Because that a world without tigers, without butterflies, most people would probably have the same kind of life, but everything would just be a whole lot less awesome. These animals out here, the butterflies starting to pop out now and the bees coming out, they are the greatest show on earth. And protecting that for future generations is important, because here's a big one. Once they're gone, they're gone. Once we lose a species for good, it's not coming back. If we kill off all tigers, there will never be any more tigers. If we kill, the last shark, we will never see another shark. And that is a huge loss. So I think the most important reason for protecting species is because they're here. So, thanks for staying with me during this video. Again, I'll much rather meet with you live in the lab, but for now this is what we can do. I just put here a slide to show what the syllabus is, and you can always go back and check the syllabus and check the book if you want any more information. If you have any questions, you can write me in Teams, or you can just write here under the YouTube video and I'll do my best to answer. Have a nice day.